You're listening to Tarazi Tuesdays with the Bible as Literature.
Hi, this is Father Mark Boulos, and you are listening to Tarazi Tuesdays with the Bible as Literature podcast. For years, Father Paul has stressed that the only way to teach Scripture is by giving practical examples. Scripture is practical knowledge. From an early age, he explains, children can hear the text only if you relay its content with common sense examples, unlike complex theological theories that confuse children and betray the text, deactivating its functions. I am happy to introduce Father Paul on the Bible as Literature podcast, Tarazi Tuesdays.
Going back to Numbers, let's follow the content. And here I'm going to go on a big aside, but first I want to explain myself. The census of the people is detailed in the first chapters, and then again at the end of the book, we hear another census at the end of the trek in the wilderness. Thus, the census is very important, at least in the message of this book. But to deal with the census and how it is handled in the book of Numbers, so we should call it the book of the census, which is the meaning of numbers, to number the people, make the census. God is issuing a command for an action on his behalf, which, and this is the stunning thing, is introduced later in the story of David as being something evil. And I would like to take my time on the passages that we find in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles regarding David. And I need to take my time to show you again how, unless you know the entirety of the Bible, you will never be able to comprehend what the Bible is saying to you. You have to know it all and very well. It's not that you are a pro in the letter of Paul to the Galatians and you offer an elective on Galatians at the seminary. It doesn't work that way. Just remember the size of my commentary on Galatians, for which I was criticized by an honorable colleague of mine from another Orthodox institution, who would write 500 pages on a book which is 6 pages. Because that's the problem. So bear with me. I shall start to speak about the census. But let me begin with a comment on that. A census is usually done by the proprietor of what is being submitted to the census. And thus, only a king, and remember we're talking Hebrew, a melech, the owner can do that. It's a rundown of one's property, not of my people in the sense we understand it today, who voted for you. No, they are yours. And I'm going to read in detail, with your permission, and comment on 2 Samuel chapter 24, and then its parallel 1 Chronicles chapter 21. Now, the first one is impressive for the following reasons. Number one, it is the last story about David. It's a chapter standing on its own, where David decided to have a census, but we're going to hear the phraseology, which is very impressive. That's why it was a little bit watered down in 1 Chronicle. So I'm going to read, and sometimes in parallel, the two texts to make my comments. It's a bad thing, obviously, from the story, because David is going to be chastened for the action he did. But verse 1 of chapter 24, it is the last chapter of 2 Samuel. We hear the following. Again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Obviously, this again because we heard it so many times before that. And notice the phraseology. If it is good enough in English, I don't want to linger too much on the Hebrew, but that's the meaning. And he incited David against them, saying, "Go, number Israel and Judah." Okay? English is good enough for my point, so there is no reason to belabor that. It's more powerful in Hebrew, but the meaning is there. It's strange that the Lord is inciting David against his own people, and God is going to end by punishing the people and punishing also David. Let me jump to 1 Chronicles and see what we hear parallel to that verse 1 of Samuel 24. In 1 Chronicles 17, we hear Satan stood up against Israel and incited David to number Israel. You can hear the difference. In 2 Samuel, it's the Lord who incited David. Here it's Satan. And that reminds you of the story of Job, where Satan is a major actor. Now remember that in the original scriptural canon, Job and the 2 books of Chronicles are part of the Ketubim, and that's something which is very hard to swallow by us who are trained to read our Bibles that follow what I would call the Septuagint, that somehow lumps all the books that are a narrative about the so-called story of biblical Israel together. In our Bibles, after 1-2 Samuel and 1-2 Kings, you have 1-2 Chronicles. And that's why we don't see or hear the close relationship between Job and Chronicles. By the way, the same applies to the book of Daniel, who in the original canon, the Hebrew, appears towards the end of the Ketubim, before Ezra and Nehemiah and the 2 books of Chronicles. But suddenly it was moved in the Septuagint to appear as the 4th prophet. So in our Bibles, we have Daniel as the 4th major prophet, and then the book of the 12, which is again a betrayal of the original. We have to be very careful on that. But someone who's hearing the original Hebrew makes immediately the connection of the story at the beginning of Job, where Satan is the one that does the work that God allows him to do. Now, the word Satan in Hebrew, as we hear at the end of Zechariah in chapter 3 verses 1 and 2, we have Satan explained on the basis of the Hebrew, meaning it is the one who prosecutes, and thus it became the diabolos. You know how the DA, the prosecutor, tried to put doubt in the mind of the jury regarding the one he is attacking. And I'm going to read to you the first 2 verses of chapter 3. Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to accuse him. There you go, you have it. And the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is not this a brand plucked from the fire? So, here, and I would like to end on this note, that everything is functional. You cannot say, the DA is a bad person. You can't talk like that. That's why even theology went around to say that Satan is a fallen angel. I mean, if he is a member of the council of God in Job, that's a very serious position. But its mission is to make sure that ultimately God appears as a just judge. And teach it to the children very early. Not by throwing in their face orthodox theology or any kind of theology. Just speak the language of the mayor and the DA. They understand that. So what's the problem in communicating this understanding? And then you throw at them the technical knockout by reading aloud to them the beginning of 2 Samuel 24 and the beginning of 1 Chronicles 17, which, as we shall see, are verbatim the same thing. It's the same story. But with the exception that you have the introduction of Satan as we have it at the beginning of Job.
The Bible as Literature is a production of the Ephesus School Network.